All right, so this is genetics 2. Let's look at problem number 1 on the genetics 2 worksheet. This is about radishes. So now we're looking at a little bit of different inheritance patterns besides just plain complete dominance. So let's look at this first one. Radishes have a gene that controls the color. You'll have to look at the problems on your worksheet. It exhibits incomplete dominance. So that gives us a clue that to technically write this properly, we're not going to want to use big letters and little letters because that big little means complete dominance. So we're going to choose some other sort of representation. We have true breeding red radishes crossed with true breeding white give you purple radishes. So that just tells you that when you have heterozygotes, one of the red alleles, one of the white alleles, you get purple looking. And that tells you it's incomplete dominant. So I wouldn't even actually have to tell you it's incompletely dominant in the problem if I told you that you mix a red radish and a white radish and get purple radishes. That's going to tell you it's incomplete dominance. So let's do this and say CR is red, CW is white. This is all the C gene. And then CW is purple radish. Now they ask us, what are the genotypic and phenotypic ratios when you cross a purple radish with a white radish? All right, so we already know, that's the nice thing about incomplete dominance, you know all the genotypes no matter what, because every genotype is a different phenotype. So to be purple, we have to be CRCW. Now there are other ways of representing this. You could also use like A prime if you wanted. You could use something like A1 allele, A2 alleles. Those would all be appropriate. It's just not really appropriate to use like big R, little r, because neither one is dominant over each other. With big R, little r, you expect to see the big R phenotype when you have it. In this case, the R and the W don't cover each other up, they just make purple. White is always CWCW, and so this is actually the cross you're looking at. You'll notice, so the parent on the left can give a CR gamete, or it can give a CW gamete. The parent on the right, this one only has CWs as the gamete to give. So we cross those, and we see what happens. They ask us for genotypic and phenotypic ratio. Let's give them the genotypic ratio. Genotypic ratio is 1 CRCW, 2, 1 CWCW. Phenotypically, that's going to give us 1 purple radish, 2, 1 white radish. Question number 2. Certain breeds of cattle show incomplete dominance in coat color. When true breeding red cattle are bred with true breeding white cattle, the offspring are roan, or pinkish coat colored. Write the expected genotypic and phenotypic ratios of the offspring of when a roan cow is mated with a roan bull. All right, so let's write down what we know. This time I can use CR, CW again. Doesn't matter as long as I know what I'm talking about. So CRs is going to give us a red cow or bull. The CWs will give us a white cow or bull, and the CRCW gives us the roan color, or the pinkish sort of color. So they tell us we have 2 roan cows, or 2 roan cattle being crossed. Here's a roan cow and a roan bull. Okay, so both parents have 2 different types of gametes they could donate. All right, now they want to know, so genotypic ratio, we'll look at 1 CRCR, 2 CRCW, to 1 CWCW. Phenotypic ratio, we have our CRCR is red, so we have 1 red to 2 CRCWs, which in this case are roan or pinkish, to 1 white. And that's the ratio we expect to come out of this cross. Question number 3 on genetics 2 actually combines question 2 with an additional gene. So it says cattle have a second gene for horned versus hornless cattle. The allele for horns is dominant, so I'm going to make an H for horns, which means little h is no horns. And if you recall, our CR was the red, CW was the roan, and CW is the white. If a bull and cow are heterozygous for both the horn and the coat color genes, what's the probability for each possible phenotype? So we have a cow and a bull, so that are heterozygous for both. We want to know what the probability for each possible phenotype is. So you could do some combinations here where you figure out all the different gametes that are formed and do a big Punnett square, 16 square Punnett square. That would work. It's much easier to do it with probabilities and look at two separate Punnett squares. So all we have to do, as long as these are independently assorting, is look at our H's and we'll look at our C's and do those separately. So our H's is, again, a monohybrid cross. By this point, you should be becoming real familiar with these. So these end up with our 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of genotypes, 3 to 1 phenotypic ratio. I'll just draw it out again for us. And then we have our CR-CW cross. Saw this on question number 2. All right, so those are our different possible genotypes. And we want to know what are the phenotypic probabilities. So let's think of what we can look like. We can be 3 different colors and 2 different horn states. So we could have a red coat and have horns. We could have a roan coat and have horns, or a white coat and have horns. We could have a red coat and be no horns. We could have a roan coat with no horns, and we could have a white coat with no horns. And then what we go is we just go to our Punnett squares and see how many, what's the probability of each of these things. So what's the probability of being a red cow? So if we go over to this Punnett square here, this is our colors, we see that only 1 out of our 4 boxes gives us a red cow. And so that means that there's a 1 in 4 probability of being red, crossed with the probability of having horns. So let's go to our horns. And so how many of these are horns? Horns are, if we look back up, horns are dominant. So 1, 2, 3 of these boxes give us horns. So that's a 3 out of 4 chance of being horned. And you multiply those together, you get 3/16 probability of being red cow with horns. Then we do our roan. So roan, now we have 2 ways to be roan. So 1/2 of those boxes are roan, crossed with horns, again, is 3 out of 4 boxes give you that, so that's a 3/4 probability, gives you 3/8, which is also equal to 6/16. If you're doing some sort of ratio in the end, you have to have them all by the same denominator. If not, 3/8 is a perfectly fine probability. All right, white, to be white is only this option here, so that's 1/4 probability of being white. Cross with the horns, again, it's the 3/4, and that's going to give us 3/16 chance of being white and horned. And then we go to our no horns. So red, probability of being red is just 1 out of 4. This box right here. Probability of having no horns is recessive, and you can always go check it because you wrote it up at the top. No horns is recessive. We see that right here. So that means that that's also a 1 in 4 chance which gives us a 1/16th probability of being red with no horns. Roan has 2 out of 4 boxes, so 1/2 of the boxes are roan possibilities. To be no horns, again, is 1 out of 4, and so multiplying those, we get 1/8 or 2/16 chance of being roan with no horns, and being white with no horns, we have 1 box there to be white and 1 box to be no horns, and that gives us 1/16 possibility or probability of being a white cow with no horns. So now we're on to problem number 4. This one is about blood type, and if you remember, there's 3 alleles for blood types, the ABO blood types at least, the IA allele, the IB allele, and the little I allele. And different combinations of these make different blood types. The blood type is also a codominant, so what that means is that if you have the IA and the IB, you see both of them at the same time. So this problem says a man with blood type AB, so our man has AB blood type, marries a woman with type B blood, and her mother has type O blood. What's the expected phenotypic and genotypic ratios of their children? Okay, so the man AB, there's only one option for that. So we know for sure, I'm going to put the man on top of this Punnett square. The man is IA, IB. So half his sperm should have an A allele in it, half his sperm should have a B allele in it. The woman, we know she's IB and then either another IB or little I. And they give us more information in here. They give us her mother's genotype. Well, they give us the phenotype of O. We know the genotype of little I, which means the daughter must have gotten a little I from her mom. So the woman is the IB little I. So when you cross those, just do it like normal. And I really do want you to write the alleles like this, just so that it's clear that the I gene, it's all the same gene. There's just 3 different alleles of it, but it's not 3 different genes. All right, so phenotypic ratio, this is going to be the blood types. So we're expecting 1 AB blood type, 2, 1A blood type, I'm going to abbreviate for space sake, it's BT is blood type, 2, then both of these are actually going to show up as B blood types. So 1AB to 1A to 2B. That's what we're going to see phenotypically, hypothetically. Genotypes, we just write down what we see for the alleles. 1 IAIB to 1 IBIB. Now the B's are separate in this case because they're different genotypes. 1 IB little I to 1 IA little I. So that's the proportions of the offspring that you expect to have different genotypes and different phenotypes. All right, this is number 5 on genetics 2. The problem says a father with type AB blood and a mother with type A blood, and they want to know which of the blood types can the kids not have. So which kids could they not probably make? So father is easy because there's only one genotype that makes AB blood, the IAIB. And so we could put it sort of in a Punnett square if you wanted to. And then the mother to be IA, and she can be either IA or she can be little I to give her I blood or to give her A blood type. So we can work out our Punnett square, and some of these ones on top have just one option. So far we've made A blood type, we've made AB blood type. We could also make this, we could have another IA, that's A blood type, or instead we could have an IA little I, if the mom has a little I, that's just another A blood type. And in the last box, the IB from the dad for sure, and we could either have another AB if the mom has the second allele, or we can have a B blood type if mom has the little I allele, so we could get B. So the only genotype that does not seem probable is the little I, which means the kids probably cannot have type O blood. This is number 6 on genetics 2. A woman with type A blood and a man with type B blood could potentially have offspring with what blood types? So for a woman to be A blood, we know she has at least an IA, and then the second one's either an IA or a little I. And then the father to be B has an IB, and then he either has another B or a little I. What kind of offspring can we get? So sometimes people can see it like this. Some people need to write it out in a Punnett square-ish form. I'll do that. This is the mom, dad down the side. Okay, so if we look, we can see that if these two crossed, we'd make an AB baby. And then we could also have another AB from these two here. We could also make a B and a little I. So a B and a little I is going to equal B blood type. This one here, we did the B and the A. That's an AB blood type. We've already got that. We could also take the little I and the A, and that gives us an A blood type. And then on the last one, we could have an IAIB. That's AB. We already have that. Or we could have a little I and a little I, which gives us O blood type. So the offspring possible, all blood types are possible between these two parents, considering that you don't know anything about the woman or the father's parents themselves. So we have to assume that they could have recessive alleles and therefore could make offspring. If we knew more about the parents of these two people, we might be able to rule out little I, if we knew that for sure one of them did not contain the little I as an allele. This is problem number 7 from genetics 2. In this case, the mother has type A blood and her husband has type B. Their child has type O. The question is, can the child be from her husband? He says no, and she's one. Now we need to say is he right or not. So we know that the mom must have an IA, and then she either has another IA or a little I, and the dad has to be IB, and he could have another IB or a little I. So the kid is O, so you say, is there any combination between those two parents that can make an O? And if you recall, O is little I, little I. So do both parents have a little I? Well, here's a little I in the dad, here's a possible little I in the mom. So it is possible from the information that we're given that this mother and this father can have an O blood child. So no, the dad's not right. He could be the father. This is problem number 8 from genetics 2. In this case, the mother has type B blood, which means that she is an IB and either an IB or a little I. And dad has type AB, so there's only one way to get that, an IAIB. The kid has little I, little I. So you look at the parents and see, can they have this combination? So the mom has a little I to give to the offspring. But when we look at dad, dad does not have a little I to give to the offspring. So barring an unusual situation, it is not very probable that this is the father of that child. So the father is right. The child can't be his. This is question number 9 from genetics 2. The mother has type A blood. The father has type B. His mother has type O. What are all the phenotypic possibilities of blood types for their children? So the mom's blood type is easy. She's only one option, IAIB. The dad we know has IB, and then he could have IB or little I, but the fact that his mom had O means she must have given him a little I. She only has little I's to give, so that's what the dad must have gotten, her son. And so now we know the parents of the possible children. Draw a Punnett square. So there's AB blood there. This is type B blood. This is type A blood. This is another type B. So it looks like AB, B, and A are all possible blood types for their children. This is problem number 10 from genetics 2. Achondroplasia, a type of dwarfism, is caused by a dominant gene. So I'm labeling that big D here. And that codes for dwarfism. That means that the little d codes for the average height. A woman and a man, both with dwarfism, have children. Homozygous achondroplasia results in death of the embryos. That's what I've written here. Write the expected genotypic and phenotypic ratios of live birth offspring. So these two parents with dwarfism, we know that they have a big D. And because of the fact that 2 big Ds results in death, we know that they must be heterozygotes or they wouldn't be alive. So we have 2 heterozygotes. We're going to cross those. So it's just a monohybrid cross. But you have to pay attention to what's possible live offspring. So the fact that this big D causes death means that you will never get any of this box as live offspring. You won't ever see them. So that changes our proportions here. So we only have 3 boxes left. So 2 out of those are big D, and 1 is little d, little d. which means it's or you expect 2 dwarfs for every 1 average height child. So you can see that's 2 out of 3 chance of being a dwarf, 1 out of 3 chance of being average height. This is problem number 11 from Genetics 2. Hemophilia is a recessive disorder whose defective gene, which I've denoted H, is located on the X chromosome. So that's why I draw an X for the X chromosome, and I draw a little h for the lack of clotting, which is the defective gene, because it's a recessive disorder. That means the X big H is normal clotting factor. Just to remind you, since we're talking about X's, we also have to include Y's, but the Y does not have the H gene on it. That's what makes this inheritance different between males and females. We have a man that's normal clotting and a woman who is a carrier, which means she is also normal clotting, but her father had hemophilia most likely. They want to know the ratio of boys and girls separate. What is the phenotypic and genotypic ratios? So a normal male, so first of all, if it's X-linked, we draw an X and a Y for a male and an X for a female. Then we need to figure out what's on those X alleles. We know the Y doesn't have anything on it, so you'll never put anything on the Y. So if the man is normal, that means he must have a normal clotting factor allele because he only has one, and so that one must be working properly. The female, it's called a carrier. Carrier is another word for a heterozygote for a recessive allele. So she must have one big H and one little h. Then we're going to do a Punnett square for those. So we'll put the father up here and the mother down the side, and then we'll cross them. And you'll notice half of the offspring, like I'm drawing right now, are girls and half are boys. Now, of course, this means probability is that you get half girls, half boys. So let's report them separately. So we'll report the girls first. So genotypic ratio for the girls, we have 1 X big H, 2 1 X big H, X little h. So that means that one is a 1 completely normal to 1 carrier female. Now phenotypically though, 100% of the females will be normal clotting. So even though a carrier has the allele, you'll never see it. It's the whole point of being a carrier is that you don't show the allele. And so all the girls are normal clotting. If we look at the boys, the probability of the genotypes, we have 1 XHY, X big HY, to 1 X little hy. That means for a phenotypic ratio, we expect 1 normal clotting male for every 1 hemophiliac male. So you can see the girls never inherit hemophilia from this combination of parents, while the boys have a half a chance of inheriting it from that parent. So if I ask you, these people are going to have kids, what's the probability that they have a hemophiliac child? Well, that's 1 out of 4 boxes. If I tell you these parents are having a son, what's the probability he has hemophilia? Then you're only looking at the boys, and then you say it's a 1 out of 2 chance. These parents are having a daughter. What's the chance she has hemophilia? That's 0. What's the chance that they have a carrier daughter? That's 1/2. And so if you know that they're having a daughter or a son, you only look at that sex of the baby. If you don't, you look at all of the possible offspring.